So Tom Apperley is a senior research fellow at the Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies. He conducts research on digital games and playful technologies with an emphasis on their impact and influence on culture, particularly areas such as social policy, pedagogy, and social inclusion. His previous writing has covered broadband policy, digital games, digital literacies and pedagogies, mobile media, and social inclusion. His open access print on demand book, Game and Rhythms, Play and Counterplay from the Situated to the Global was published by the Institute of Network Cultures in 2010. Tom's more recent work has appeared in Games and Culture, New Review of Multimedia and Hypermedia, and Media International Australia. So here's Tom, and before we start, I would like to introduce Game Studies India to all of you who are new here. So we are a sort of a small community who try to get together once a week or so, and we discuss video games in a meaningful manner, especially from a humanities-informed perspective. And we have people from the game industry. We have gamers amongst us. We have game research scholars amongst us, and we're about at this point we're about 7 to 8 or 9 months old actually, and that's us. And we are so happy, we're so excited to welcome Tom amongst us today. Tom, we can begin now.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Poonam. And thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for inviting me here to speak to you and your colleagues. Today, I'm going to be talking about some new research that I'm doing that looks at the intersection between gaming and fashion. Now, at first take, this area might seem a bit marginal and sort of not really a center area, a key area to look at, but I think that this impression has meant that the area has been very much unexplored. And in this talk, I want to examine one of many possible openings which connect gaming and fashion, which don't necessarily need to be thought of as completely discrete. And I'm making this connection as a scholar of video games. So as you can see, I'm not very knowledgeable about fashion personally. And as secondarily, I'm not exactly an expert on theories of fashion in a kind of academic sense, but this is an area which I'm exploring. Now, this talk is part of a larger project which examines the incorporation of, of video game technologies into erotic and pornographic imagery. A key discovery in that project is that community-curated collections of video game erotica often include images which prominently featured women's apparel and fashion accessories. In many cases, the connection between the erotic imagery and gaming culture was made through these apparel, and in some cases, images that were included in the collections were originally created to showcase and advertise apparel. Garments, then, were central to how the images had been reinterpreted through a visual regime which categorized them alongside erotica and pornography because their subject was a woman playing video games or otherwise demonstrating an affiliation with gaming cultures. I'll start this talk by drawing some parallels between how cultural studies has approached garments and models and existing work in game studies that explores gender and considers how issues of embodiment, affect, and emotion can contribute to our understanding of the experience of playing games and being a part of gaming culture. Then I will briefly discuss how the project seeks to decenter questions of objectification and the male gaze, while still acknowledging that the images discussed often reflect a dominant visual regime. In the second half of the talk, I'll focus on exploring a series of studies which explore how women are fashioning game cultures and are modeling effective relations. A model is a person whose job it is to promote, display, or advertise a commercial product. In this role, they may collaborate with photographers and other artists to create images. The performance that models conduct in their role is highly specific and often described as the generation of affect by scholars. Fashion is one of the many industries that generates labor for models. In the everyday sense, it is a form of self-expression. Fashion is a form of self-expression, but this form of self-expression is embedded in the mass production of commodities and which also exploit existing inequalities. While both men and women are models and a part of the fashion industry, women occupy a significantly more visible role. Indeed, in gaming cultures, I'll argue that fashion contributes to the visibility of women in that culture. Those cultures, maybe. Garments and fashion accessories more generally are a key constituent of the material culture of gaming that can tell us a great deal about the role of games and identity in social relationships. They are of crucial importance for the study of games because they have highly divisive symbolic value in gaming cultures. While they are clearly not games, they suggest multiple ways for the otherwise unarticulated relational and affective dimensions to be shared and experienced. Garments evoke how games feel and how they touch people and are touched, how they move people emotionally and physically, how they hold people. Fashion, as an expression of affinity for games and gaming, is often regarded as women getting it wrong about what it means to be a gamer. Women, from everyday gamers to social media influencers, models, and sex workers, are accused of performing their gaming wrong by those that perceive a lack of authenticity in their emotions, gestures, motion, comportment, or expression. Dressing up or standing out as feminine in general is derisively called attention-seeking behavior. This demonstrates how everyday misogyny permeates the governance and surveillance of women's bodies in gaming culture. The popularity of streaming makes bodies visible in popular portrayals and accounts of play, and highlights the centrality of the body in enacting the game and the embodied experience of gaming itself. It marks the body as a site through which the shared experience of gaming is understood and the virtual experience of play is made comprehensible. It is crucial for demonstrating the skill involved in high-level performance, competitive play, and esports. The new visibility of bodies also contributes to how we understand homogeneity and difference in gaming cultures, as it makes the historic hegemony of the assumed able-bodied, white, straight, cis-male gamer tangible through historic artifacts, while also offering palpable evidence that other perspectives have been overlooked. The question I'm interested in today is, do video game fashions and models offer us different perspectives on the bodily experiences of gaming? Specifically, can they offer us perspective that is not just about skill and experience in the game, but also feelings of comfort, dwelling, and intimacy, which such activities may also engender? Initial work on women in gaming culture examined the representation of women in digital games, noting that there was a highly masculine visual culture in gaming where women had to struggle for visibility. While some scholars like Schleiner and Phillips have noted that this visual culture offers many different possible interpretations, and Ruberg with others has constructively demonstrated how queer readings can be applied, it seems that ideas about who precisely gamers are only changing very slowly. Chess and Enable both use casual gaming to explore the enduring spectre of the dominant male demographic of gaming in face of a clear diversification of gendered participation in the activity. Other scholars have examined the sexist and sexual elements of the promotional cultures of gaming and point out that they embed a highly exclusionary rhetoric in gaming culture, shoring up the fading hegemony of straight white male gamers. Affect in this talk is understood in terms of precognitive forces or intensities that bring bodies together. The affective dimensions of gaming include continual modulation through changes in the rhythm and intensities of the game, and the game player's changing kinesthetic responses, which include specific focuses of movement and attention that may involve a total change in the comportment of the body. The explicit role of game design as the modulation of effect has been highlighted in recent scholarship by Aubrey and Abel, James Ash, Christopher Moore, and Natasha Schull. And Abel characterizes casual games as affective systems, arguing that we make choices and push buttons in games because of how games structure our feelings about those choices and actions. This emphasis on game design as modulation suggests that gaming culture is a domain shaped by affective labor. Not just from the perspective of design, but also many other game workers are involved in the production and modulation of emotional experiences. From community managers to streamers and moderators. Scholars like Marlianne Butt have extended affective labor in gaming into the domestic sphere, arguing that women players are often expected to act in ways which support their domestic partner's hobby, even to the extent of gaming with them in support roles. Affective labor is also crucial to understanding the labor of a photographic model, in that models manipulate affect or feeling by acting, engaging, and connecting with themselves and others with the goal of stimulating and projecting a feeling of vitality or aliveness. Elizabeth Wissinger states, fashion modeling is the work of being and being assisted to be open to interactions with the technologies such as photography that channel attention. Modeling for Wissinger highlights the relationship between bodies and technologies that modulate bodily capacities. Although women's garments and underwear may have the function of pleasing their erotic partners, they also satisfy their own desires. Amy Chin points out that this issue has been often misunderstood by the fashion and garment industry. Jansen describes the process of underwear purchasing and selection by women as establishing control over a field of contradictions. While underwear has been for centuries a way to constrain and mold women's bodies into the aesthetic ideals of the contemporary patriarchy, it's also a way for women to privately define themselves, as the purchase and use of underwear may generate specific experiences of femininity. Jansen further argues that underwear conveys a social identity while also generating private feelings of satisfaction, pleasure, and comfort. At the same time, through inducing a feeling of pleasure and comfort, it becomes a touchstone for what it means to be comforted or feel pleasure. On the issue of objectification in the male gaze, I'm very much indebted to the recent work on the topic by Fiona Atwood, Ellen McKee, John Mercer, Susanna Parsonen, and Clarissa Smith. Importantly, they raised the issue that emphasizing the objectification of the male gaze means that discussion of the role of images in self-fashioning and making connections between people is often overlooked. Certainly, the way that these images prioritize certain bodies reflects the sexist, racist, and body normative underpinnings of a wider visual regime and a historic industry bias that video game consumers are male, but they also demonstrate the possibility for agency which is otherwise unexpressed and unrepresented in gaming culture. Why should these images be excluded from consideration as a part of gaming culture? Simply because they have sexual elements. The labor of the game workers in these images is significant, not simply because they document the presence of women in the history of gaming, but because through their effective labor, they model the intensities and emotion of gameplay and the gaming experience and fashion the possibility for different types of effective relations. I have selected 4 cases to use to discuss these issues in a more concrete manner and suggest how they impact on the past and present states of gaming culture. These cases have been selected from a large archive of primary visual images that I've been developing since 2014, which maps the intersection of digital games and erotic and pornographic imagery, and intersections between these industries. The first example comes from the Nerdcore discussion on the Destructoid online community in 2006. The second will focus on the crowdfunded business Maison Pixel, and the third on the widespread incorporation of gaming imagery into everyday glamour photography. Finally, I will consider these issues in relation to contemporary social media influences. Destructoid was an independent digital game-focused online community that was launched in March 2006 by Cuban-American Yania Gonzalez. In a 2016 interview, Gonzalez stated one of his reasons for starting Destructoid was that gaming news outlets at the time still buried their community content and refused to accept that they needed to have a comments section. He envisioned Destructoid as a community where members played an active role in producing the site's content, which is illustrative of the new games journalism movement, which was active at the time, as it covered this, as it didn't just cover games, it covered the subculture of games as well as games, and it allowed a more personal, subjective style in reviews that approached digital games as experiences. Yet Gonzalez positioned Destructoid as providing an alternative to what was perceived as a colorless and impersonal game writing at the time. At first, Gonzalez relied heavily on others for additional content, as he was making 4 posts a day and working full-time. In particular, he relied on 2 community posters, Faith and Hamza Aziz. Faith was Destructoid's first female contributor, while Aziz crafted content that was edgy and was based on the weirdest stuff he could find on 4chan. During 2006 and 2007, Aziz, along with Faith and Gonzalez, created a series of popular posts on Destructoid, which examined various aspects of what he described as nerdcore pornography. The series consisted of 7 main posts, starting from July 2006 and continuing through to April 2007. And the first one was called Nerdcore, Naked Gamer Girls Covered in Video Games, and featured 74 images. These posts were incredibly popular and resonated with many of the cultivated elements of the site. The collected images were amateur and edgy, as well as reflecting the primarily heterosexual and masculine libidinal interests of the community, which, according to advertising documents, is 95% male. Some commentators were particularly pleased with the emergence of these collections because they confirmed the adultness of digital games and would help the industry to understand the changing age demographic of gaming cultures. In the early years of the site, the joint experience of the images became part of how the community defined themselves. So, for example, the communities had its own song, which was about these posts, and these posts were the most visited posts in the whole community blog, to the point where the Yania Gonzalez and Hamza Aziz were actually upset that they'd kind of overshadowed all the other content. Many of the images have become widely circulated and signal larger aesthetic developments in digital gaming as sexual expression. In the images taken from Digital Press website, which you can see here, an aspiring and later successful model and an online sex worker model first the company's t-shirts and publications, and then some relatively obscure technology from the early Nintendo and Sega era. These images capture their effective labor in presenting items and technology. However, their ability to present themselves as playing games is somewhat constrained due to the rather amateurish compositions of the shots, which may affirm the sexist notion that women and girls are not real gamers. So these kind of images get criticized because the women aren't presented as playing games, they're just holding things. Other images from the Nerdcore collection present images which seek to present the casual domestic intimacy of women at play in their underwear. Although some of the images highlight how video game related clothing may suggest ambiguous playability of women's bodies, one which both feeds into a misogynist notion that women's bodies are unlockable by the correct moves, and into the more affirming notion that women play with themselves and express their own sexuality playfully. The final theme from the Nerdcore images, which is significant, is the emergence of an unruly aesthetic of disarray that plays with the minimalism of feminine glamour shots by including multiple items from video games and/or geek cultures more generally in the shot. In some cases, these items literally clothe the models, suggesting a sense of intimacy with the items, which are often the hand-operated controllers for video games consoles, which is established through touch. Less common is a representation of the physical entanglement with the objects by wrapping the cords around body parts, which further suggests there's an inextricable nature of this intimacy, like in the sense that in English kind of common saying about wedding might be called, getting married might be called tying the knot. We see this entanglement here between woman and technology, which is very much like being tied to the game technology. Okay, so in this second case, I want to discuss this phenomena of pixel panties. Designers were also considering how video game imagery and aesthetics could be integrated with women's intimate garments. One experimental design was the 2008 Geekini by designer John Nuancing. This garment was presented as swimwear and thus is in theory outerwear rather than underwear. It's designed for showing to the public. However, the design was never mass-produced and is one of the many niche products Nuancing uses to promote his unique design vision and skills. The design tends to augment the notion that bringing a playful gaming aesthetic to women's garments invites tactility, but suggests that women's bodies are playable, whether that be by the wearer of the garment or another person. Furthermore, it eroticizes this playability through the contrast of the controller buttons with the breasts, which draws a parallel between the repetitive and precise touch required for successful gameplay and the kind of touching which stimulates sexual arousal. This suggestion of self-pleasure could further allude to the pleasure of modulating the experience of gameplay, of the rhythmic attunement between body and software, which is a component of the bodily experience of gameplay. In contrast, the pixel panties created by Portuguese designers Maison Pixel have been mass-produced. Their website describes the factory environment as in a local and ethical context. The two designers, Sebastiano Teixeira and Cesaria Martins, consider Maison Pixel a pioneering brand that aims to fill the gap between fashion design and gaming and make the retro and nerdy 8-bit aesthetic sexy. Their Kickstarter campaign describes the inception of the design taking place after a night of intense video game during which they had a dream of sexy woman in pixelated lingerie. The garment has been incredibly successful, especially with highly followed cosplayers, gaming influencers, and high-profile sex workers who have ensured that the images of pixel panties are widely diffused across social media. While the aesthetic look of the garment is what is shared, Maison Pixel also emphasizes that the underwear is incredibly comfortable, both because of the high-quality lycra, which is used to make the garment, and because of the laser cutting technique that is used to shape the material. Thus, they maintain that pixel panties have achieved a design which is both cool and comfortable. The resonance which pixel panties has found across the internet has a very visual dimension to it, which comes not simply from the garment, but how it holds and shapes the body. As Teixeira and Martins point out in the tagline, pixel panties, made with squares, fit for round bottoms. The contrast between the grid-like pixels and the curves of the buttocks produce an interesting aesthetic which emphasizes normatively feminine attributes while signaling an intimacy with 8-bit aesthetics, which should not necessarily be understood as nostalgic, but could also be considered contemporary due to phenomena such as Minecraft. The garments also provide scope for an expression of affection and intimacy with both the past and present of gaming, which is deliberately sensual and sexual, while also being normatively feminine. They also evoke a sense of comfort in being held and touched by video games. While pixel panties may also please intimate partners and the public more generally, they also give scope to private forms of self-expression. So in this third case study, I just want to talk about the kind of, this new pin-up aesthetic which is emerging. So this starts in this, I've located the site called Geek X Girl. It's primarily a hub for feminist-inspired woman cosplayers, and it mostly promotes female cosplayer artists and performers. But over the last decade, they've also covered what they call geeky girl or gamer girl photo shoots. In these photo shoots, women models are enrolled to recreate the look and feel of gaming, and in some cases, more deliberately model subcultural garments. In this corpus, the relationship between the gamer and the material culture of gaming is explored as a multiplicity. The affective experience of women gamers is shown to be held in a collective of relations to multiple objects, toys, garments, software, pizza, etc. The body is often positioned in a glamour style shot, similar to nerdcore, against an unruly collection of objects. Again, contrasting the curve of the normative feminine body with more angular technology. This look is also explored in mainstream photography. It appears that this is one of the various roles that a model may be expected to perform, while also being a composition that professional photographers of people are expected to master. Often though, the model is more central to the composition, rather than capturing a relationship of which a human is a part, as we see in this kind of image. Professional photography, portraiture photography, emphasizes the human subject, and the gaming elements are included to supplement the image by suggesting youthful pastimes or intimate connections. So these images here are all taken from the websites of photographic studios who are promoting the kind of photography that you can purchase there, like in the sense of you can sit for this kind of photography. The reduction of the complex effects suggested by Nerdcore and Geek X Girls to contain the the material cultures of gaming, and often just a controller, highlights the importance of garments and effectively embodying the affect of gaming. For example, in the promotional images of Pamela Horton, who's on the right there, and Joe Garcia, the two images on the left, who are both at various times employed as a social media expert for Playboy, as Playboy's gamer next door. Underwear is used to convey a sense of everyday intimacy, of a woman experiencing comfort and privacy, while also evoking the allure and fantasy of the kind of spaces which gaming takes place, where everyday woman becomes sexualized and available. Here, the aesthetic, which has been informally developed in various sites around the internet, is deployed more deliberately and in relation to decades of Playboy traditions, not least the notion of the girl next door. The figure of the girl next door serves both to promote the mundane notion that women are sexual beings, while also creating a male-centered fantasy about their potential availability for sexual partners. And then we have the erotic photography of Sheree Roberts, who's a female photographer who deals almost entirely in this gaming style aesthetic. And she usually uses a technique which are sort of an aesthetic minimalism, like this kind of thing, where the experience of gaming is evoked by headphones and or a controller. But in these images I've picked out show her experimenting with ideas of disarray. So in this first one of Jenny Reed, it's trying to highlight the elements of intimacy and spontaneity while also conforming to the normative conventions of a glamour photograph. The premise behind the image is that this photograph reveals the hidden side of the effective and aesthetic workers who are often only seen in highly controlled context. So Jenny Reed's a model, and usually when she's presenting herself, it's based on some kind of script given by other people. And here she's representing herself, or that's what the story behind the image is. And Roberts also does this augmented work with a collaborator, Glenn Brogan, which disrupts the pinup aesthetic to an extent by acknowledging the hidden and virtual dimensions of the worlds of affective relations that are not usually tangible in gaming-related glamour photography. By giving life to these game-like characters and presence in these pictures, Roberts suggests the deep affection and intimacy that people have for games. And furthermore, by playfully disrupting the glamour aesthetic, they offer space for exploring this affection and intimacy outside of the simply sexual. So, for example, here we have a Samus-like character holding the model on the right. Now I want to move briefly on to discussing issues of celebrity before concluding. So in the case of the celebrity troupe Team Unicorn, their song Geek and Gamer Girls kind of reinterpreted this disarray aesthetic. It was released in 2011 and was a popular hit on iTunes at the time. The song promoted the inclusion of girls and women in geek culture on their own terms. But one point of controversy was that the video showed the artists in brief implied nude sequences that showed them individually lying among the trappings of geek culture in a manner reminiscent of the nerdcore images, or singing about their affect for such their emotional relationship with such items. The portrayal of the group as authentic nerds relied on cultivating a notion that there was an unseen yet intensely effective relationship between the performers and various objects, which they evoked through suggested nudity and other forms of embodied enthusiasm and intimacy. One of the members of Team Unicorn, Mylan Sali, has become quite a well-known professional cosplayer, and she cosplays a number of different characters very successfully, but she's also really well known for making bikini or Playboy bunny mashups of different characters, particularly from Overwatch game and the Star Wars cinematic universe. She has been hired to provide troops of Playboy bunny mashup cosplayers to official Blizzard events, including BlizzCon. But she also serializes her design process along with her collaborator Lauren Matisik in a YouTube series called Cosplay Pool Party. So for her, part of this expression of interest and attachment to games comes in making these kind of costumes which express her individual relationship with the characters and her interpretation of the characters. Digital gaming is often part of the work lives of professional models in numerous ways. One example is the US-based Russian model and actor Alina Sevastokova, who has appeared as a woman playing video games in several different productions over the last decade or so. For example, here I've got an image of her on the right posing for an erotic photo shoot. In the center is an image from a music video by a band called .x. And on the left, in a promotional image that she's made for this headset called Noon VR, Noon. According to her Russian language Wikipedia pages, she has also done voice work for a video game and has appeared in a YouTube series about esports players. So, woman working in this kind of industry, which is focused on effective labor, it might end up being involved in video game productions in a number of ways, just as part of their everyday work, because it's part of the imagery which gets produced. Then we have, I guess, like more deliberate kinds of engagements with gaming. So here we've got this really famous English language social media influencer called Cara Delevingne, who's got something like 46 million followers on Instagram. I think that makes you a celebrity of sorts. So she's like appeared in various campaigns she's a model, for example, and here she's modeling some sneakers on the right in a campaign which was shot in an arcade. And but also here on the left, we see a picture that she's released of her personal life. This is from her Hollywood mansion. She's in a picture there with her sister Poppy, who's also a model and celebrity. And Poppy's playing the Playboy pinball game by Bally, released in 1978. So it's a kind of classic and much revered pinball machine. It's considered to be one of the 10 highest quality pinball games ever made. And as you can see, she's also been very clear that she's reaching towards maybe even touching the pinball machine. So there's a very powerful kind of statement of sexy retro sophistication, which she's very carefully reaching for and touching in this very carefully composed image, which is published as part of an interview that she did with Architecture Digest about her house, about the interior decoration of the house. So that's why the subject is kind of covering furniture and so on. We can see that other women celebrities and micro celebrities also include gaming as an activity that they share on social media and other promotional images. The activity is easily relatable. We see a body adopting a similar comportment to ones we've ourselves adopted. The photograph evokes a moment of shared intensities and intimacies. The striking aesthetic of arcade cabinets and pinball machines is provided by are used to kind of create striking scenes which stand out in kind of everyone's social media feeds. I guess that you can see that there's a kind of thematic use of arcades there because they have like really striking visual elements to them, aside from this one image on the right of Rihanna where she's playing Xbox. But yeah. So now to conclude, I hope that this talk has raised some questions for consideration. First, that in video game imagery, clothing and models matter. While it's important to understand how they are shaped by a dominant visual regime and factors specific to local cultures and histories, by performing various interpretations of the relations between clothing, technology, and affect, these images offer a way of understanding trajectories of belonging to gaming culture outside of the traditionally understood forms of social capital around knowledge, expertise, and performance. They also play with and sometimes subvert the aesthetics of erotica, such as pin-up and glamour, through the aesthetics of disarray, which challenge the traditional clean, tidy aesthetic minimalism of traditional glamour photography. This element, along with clothing, become part of an expression of self rather than just being produced for the consumption of others. While there's a reasonable claim that some of these images can be read as at least partially objectifying the women who are subjects of the compositions, by examining the intersection of fashion and gaming, I've located several areas where women are the primary products of that imagery, primary producers of that imagery. Also, in the case that intersection of fashion, garments, and gaming, it is the case that the intersection of fashion, garments, and gaming illustrates niches where women and people of color have been able to produce their own imagery, which explores different forms of relations with gaming technologies and cultures. A question remains around the applicability of these phenomena and notions to a wider global culture, while still attending to the specificity of the local arrangements. And it's important to remind myself and others that the work I've done largely focuses on Anglophone and in general wealthier countries that define particular norms of gaming history. When working to include women who may have been considered marginal in and periphery to gaming culture, it's important to recognize that there are multiple peripheries that are worthy of elevation and scrutiny, and that the job of the historian of gaming culture is to understand these different circumstances and not simply hold up a celebratory mirror. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, for your very interesting presentation and opening up many new questions. So, Poonam, are you able to hear us? Can you take over the Q&A session, please? No, Poonam, you're on mute. Can you please unmute? Yeah.
Audible this time? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. So I was asking if we should move to the question answer session now, and we have a few we have conversations going in the chat box. Yes. So I think yeah. First question slash comment is from Ruth. She says, "Yeah, she's never played consoles in her underwear. As I'm sure none of us have, none of us women have. So male gaze, even when we are visible, yeah. So it's a comment on male gaze, and then we have a comment by Hookage Bruce. He says Twitch is now plagued by porn stars who get views for all the wrong reasons. The gaming community is suffering as views are being redirected from real gamers to aesthetic play. Do you have something to say about this, Tom?
Sorry, was that written down?
Yes, it's written down in the chat box. It's just, can you see it?
Okay. Let's have a
Yeah.
look. Just the whole chat box is kind of going a bit
Yes.
crazy for me right now. Is it happening to everyone, is it?
Sorry, come again?
Okay.
Yeah. It's you know what, Hookage Bruce, if you're online and you can hear us, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Not sure who is there here. Okay. Should I repeat? Should I repeat what you said?
All right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't do anything with this. Okay, so
Should I read it out? Is that?
yeah, maybe just read it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So he says Twitch is now plagued by porn stars who get views for all the wrong reasons. The gaming community is suffering as views are being redirected from real gamers to aesthetic play.
Okay, so I'm wondering. I don't really understand how that's a question.
Yeah, it's just a comment that he made, and
Yeah.
we will get to that, I think, later. But Ruth had a question, I think. Ruth, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. It was a fascinating talk, and it's given me lots to think about. Thank you very much, Tom. There were two things that I kind of wanted to talk about. First of all, like the whole idea of when women wear games fashion, they're like doing gaming wrong, which I totally have seen that attitude before, and I'm really glad you touched on it. The other idea was when you were talking about Maison Pixel and the whole idea of private forms of self-expression. And it kind of made me think about one of the other reactions that I see to the notion of women doing games fashion as doing gaming wrong, which is that a lot of times when I go to conventions or conferences, I see a lot of women wearing, quite smart clothes, but if you look closely, you will see little indicators of gaming fandom. For example, a necklace or a charm bracelet, or quite a smart shirt, but then there's like a kind of like Pikachu design in the corner or something like that, and it's kind of it's a way of wearing gaming. It's wearing gaming fashion, and it's smart gaming fashion that you can wear everywhere, but at the same time it's almost subversive. I maybe it's a little bit away from the topic from where you're focusing, but I just wondered about your thoughts on that as a way of privately expressing your fandom.
Well, one of the problems about being a woman and being enthusiastic about a thing is that it's often seen as an invitation for other people to be enthusiastic about you. And I think that, in a convention space or in many spaces, people who want to feel safe, but also want to express themselves, work in these kind of, like subtle ways of signaling their affiliation, which is much more about signaling it to themselves than to other people. And I mean, as you say, I didn't really touch on it, but to kind of extend this chat into that area would be an example, the sort of the rise of, game-focused Etsy crafts stores, and just a lot of cosplay artists and craft people working to create small things like badges, pins, brooches, which are about particular games or characters or so on, as a way of creating revenue streams for themselves and promoting their work. But there's a community of people who are interested in that stuff. We could, I think, also, move into the realm of tattoos and so on, in this case, and sort of things which are kind of hidden as well. But tattoos aren't necessarily so. But I really, thanks for your point, Ruth, that I've taken some notes on the things that you've said, and I hope that we get a chance to talk more sometime in the future.
Thanks for the great question, Ruth. Anyone else would like to go next and ask the question? You can simply unmute yourself and talk to Tom directly. Okay. I have a comment/question. I mean, absolutely amazing talk that you gave. I'm also thinking about how this judgmental sort of this attitude that people have towards such fake gamer girls, to quote how people call them. So I was just thinking about that. I mean, how these women who do these streamings, how these women who wear such fashion, they are often blamed for sexualizing themselves, but we don't look into how cishet men are, how they are consuming this fashion, how they are sexualizing women in general in the gaming community. So that's something to think about for sure.
There's quite a lot of complexities there that I'm still struggling with, really, because it really seems that the governance which platforms like Twitch puts on women's bodies is kind of like very much an anti-sex worker kind of measure. And so it really places a lot more scrutiny on women's bodies than it does on men's behavior.
Yeah.
So it seems very draconian, and I think it's applied very draconian in a very draconian way, and that the technology of surveillance is used to augment this kind of masculine understanding of women's bodies, where women are constantly being judged for are they making an erotic performance or not.
Yeah.
So Twitch is difficult because it also seems that there's people who are very, very good at making a game out of the rules and finding a way to produce titillating content within the rules which are provided by Twitch. I'm thinking here at the moment about the emergence of the hot tub streaming, because you're allowed to wear swimwear if you're standing in a tub. So people stream while standing in a tub in their living room, for example. This is like one of the things which has just emerged in the last couple of months.
Fascinating. Thanks for the answer, Tom. Zara is asking a question. Zara, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thank you for the fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. And I'm interested in the image richness of fashion photography in gaming cultures, especially its focus on the body as you showed us. Would you think that this image richness in pop culture has an intersection with race too? For example, what bodies make it to the popular gaming imaginary?
Thank you for this, Zara. Like, absolutely 100% spot on. And I tried to maybe deal with this in a bit more rudimentary way by kind of focusing on, I guess like the corpus that I've been using is really European and European and North American centric. But even within that, I think within industries like modeling and kind of affective labor in general, that there's a kind of exclusion of colored bodies to kind of prominent visible roles in that culture. So there's really important questions to ask about that, which is one of the reasons why I've been focusing on making sure that I've got a case study that's around women of color and cosplay at the end there, like with Mylan Sali and various other people. But also globally, it's not really very representative of women around the world, and that reflects, many kinds of visual cultures in popular culture, not just gaming. And I think that basically there's a lot more work for me to do and for others to do in that area to kind of explore it more and to, I guess, like enrich this topic with different perspectives.
Great, thank you for your response. I'm glad that you're moving in that direction and excited to see what's next.
Thank you, Zara.
Thanks for the great question, Zara. I think next we have Orithro. He would like to ask a question / make a comment.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So thank you for the talk. I really loved it. It was fascinating. So I was thinking on the topic of fashioning. I was thinking from the perspective of fashioning video game avatars, so to speak, or
Nice.
digital avatars. There and the sexualizing that happens in the design of avatars themselves, and how they end up contributing to the to the actual materials and products that end up made in the real life. Wow.
Hey, I think I understand what you're getting at. So a lot of this affection for games which we see on display in these images is centered around particular games or particular characters or games which have very central characters. And the first game which earmarks this phenomena, at least in North America and Europe, is this game Pac-Man, which was designed in Japan and was very specifically designed to appeal to women. Yeah, it's designed to appeal for women for ridiculous reasons, which I won't go into. But this idea was that we want to make a game that has a kind of a character which you can feel care for. It's not just a kind of extension of yourself as a gun or a spaceship or something like that. It's a kind of thing that like is cute and you want to hold, or you want to care for it and look after it. And we can see that over the subsequent decades, there are much more sophisticated forms of expression and avatars, which, brought out like really empowered or controversial figures like Lara Croft and so on, which people had different kinds of relationships with.
So on this statement, on this topic, I had a follow-up question about cosplayers. So cosplay in itself seems to me like a sort of in-between space where both the person themselves are actually wearing those specific design kind of or maybe provocative or to some extent, or those specific fashions, they are actually wearing them on their own, out of their own volition. But then again, cosplaying itself has a sort of has this area of being sexually provocative itself. So I was thinking that can cosplay in itself be considered as a sort of liminal space between wearing these sexualized fashions as suppose as sexualized fashions, or maybe also as a resistance, as a image of resistance. For example, the word queer has sort of initially used as derogatory. Now it's a part of the whole identity, and it's part of the movement. It's the main terminology. So I was thinking that maybe cosplaying itself has this potential of turning such problematic fashion into.
So cosplay is a mire of many different things. Like, so it's not cosplay, it's cosplays, if you know what I'm getting at here. So there's people who want to like express a kind of affection for a character by dressing as them and modeling their behavior. And then there's people who are using that aesthetic to create pornographic imagery, the mainstream pornographic imagery, like some of the big companies like Bang Brothers, etc. Are making cosplay pornography that's marketed to millions and millions of people. And then there's like online sex workers that do cam work that also use cosplay to distinguish themselves from other workers, or to kind of attract attention to their particular body type or something like that. And then there's people who make what's called lewd cosplay, which is, I guess, like a new forming I guess like glamour aesthetic, which doesn't involve nudity, but is kind of just suggestive. And this is kind of something which takes place in Patreon and OnlyFans and all of this kind of stuff. So there's numerous different ways that these fields intersect. But, I think that probably cosplay is, as its kind of own thing, is not really existing anymore. It's just a thing which is like video games. It's just lots of different people doing different things under that umbrella.
Right. I think, Aritro, I hope you got the answer to your question. We have a question from Rico. Rico, can you unmute yourself and talk?
So you mentioned briefly about Twitch policies about banning sexual content. So I was wondering, what's your opinion about porn stars who use gaming platforms like Twitch to make pornographic or sexual content, but under the gaming tag or category, thereby drawing in the views and affecting real female streamers who actually make gaming content and thus lose viewership and subscribers, since most audience prefers to watch those pornographic content instead? and since they are under the gaming category, well, they get more views. So I was wondering, what's your opinion on this, since actual streamers are losing viewership?
Okay, so I guess I don't really have maybe the answer that you're looking for. I mean, like, if you want my opinion, I mean, I'm just someone who looks at Twitch and is interested in what happens on Twitch, no matter what it is. You know, I don't think it should be one thing or another thing. Like, it is what it is. Twitch tries to exclude sex workers, but for some reason it can't. Probably the best thing that could happen would be that there start to be multiple platforms like Twitch, which people can use for different kinds of streaming. And this helps to connect people with audiences in a way that makes people happier. In the last 2 years, there's been an emergence of kind of adult game streaming. So these are streaming platforms like Plexstorm and Nude Gamer and Game With Me and ePlay, which allow game streaming on them, but also allow adult content, bearing in mind that adult content on Twitch can just be swearing or drinking a beer or smoking a marijuana joint. It's not necessarily sexual content, right? Because they're banning a whole bunch of things, and, you know, like, because of what they want to have on their platform.
Rico, did you get your answer, or did you get some clarity on your question?
Yeah. So thank you, Tom.
Although in my opinion, I don't see a problem with porn stars using Twitch to make sexual content. I mean, if they want to make money, if they're making money, I mean, they might as well. It's not that, I mean, they are not the problem. The problem, if there's a problem, it's the people who consume that content. I mean, if people are getting attracted to that, I mean, it's on them, not on the creator, right?
That's
Sorry?
a debatable topic, because Twitch is not a porn platform, unfortunately. It's a live stream platform. So yeah, I think actually we can host a totally different and lengthy talk regarding this, because that's a vast topic, whether Twitch and YouTube, and like regarding Twitch and YouTube and what kind of content should and shouldn't be allowed.
But I mean, I just want to point out here, right, that the platform itself of Twitch looks remarkably similar to a webcam sex site, like and so does this platform now that we're using. Like, that these platforms are universal and, you know, just part of life, and we might label them different things, but basically what the technology that a sex worker uses, and the technology that a game streamer uses, and technology that a person like me uses to talk to people like you is remarkably similar.
Precisely.
Can I just chime in here?
Yeah.
A slightly different thing. It's been kind of bothering me ever since Sarah's question. I mean, and this is not just for Tom, because you said that you're just sort of getting into this right now. But my question is, there are many people, and we're having a lot of chats behind this in WhatsApp and everywhere else. So my question is regarding the scenario in India and the Indian subcontinent. I mean, this just seems absolutely kind of like not happening here, as far as I've been kind of surveying. So what's the scenario in India? And the cosplayers I know, some of them I know personally as well, they're usually kind of very careful about the kind of cosplays that they do as well. I've never really gone down and asked them why, but I'm now kind of curious. Is it because our system has kind of doesn't support this, or is it because we haven't kind of entered these cultures as much? Does anybody have any idea here? I mean, and I'm also talking about kind of other countries in the global south. Tom, you know Venezuela very well as well, and many other parts of Latin America probably. What happens in you know?
So I missed some of your question, I think, Suvik.
So I was just asking about the scenario in the global south, really. What, why does this kind of, why is it not as evident in the global south gaming cultures? Or is it evident and I've missed it? I mean, I know about the Indian scenario, but I was also thinking also of the cosplayers as well as kind of, like branding and, with video game images and things like that. Fashion branding. So is this kind of something which is you mentioned that you were focusing mainly on North America and Europe, but are you focusing on North America and Europe because there is much more material only in North America and Europe? And if that is so, then why is it so? That's my question, really.
Okay. Well, it's a lot of material that is more oriented towards sex work, includes people from the developing world or the global south, right? Because sex work often relies on kind of capitalizing on the different kinds of currency exchange which take place for things. So a lot of the women that are working on gaming related cam sites that are targeted at North America are from Latin countries, Ecuador, Central America, etc. Then there's also a lot of expatriates from Latin America and Spain and in North America who have moved into the porn industry and make game-related porn, for example. There's also, I guess, like diasporic kind of elements to the culture, to Indian culture, which I've connected. But I didn't mention in my talk because I focused on fashion and I didn't want to bring in pornography too much to the talk today. But I think that, as I work I'm not really using any discernible method, but what I'm trying to do is just follow things that I find. So, because the global pornography industry is so focused in, a few different locations, Montreal, Prague, LA, that these connections eventually lead to a lot of different places. So there's a lot of women that are in Eastern Europe, like the poorer countries in Europe, like Romania, Moldavia, so on, that are involved in streaming adult games or in doing sex work in games like Second Life or IMVU. Basically, a lot of the world is still unknown to me. But I'm sure that there's something. Like, for example, I managed to find the images from Peacock, right? That in India, this is an India online fashion magazine. I was also thinking of adding this as well, but he tends to mask his own Indianness anyway. Does anyone know who this guy is? So this is, he uses the stage name of Kieran Lee. He's the highest paid male porn star in the world from about 2012 to 2016 or 17. His penis is insured for $1 million. But he's, I'm trying to remember his real name. It's Adam Dixa. and he's a member of the Indian diaspora from Derby in England.
I mean, that's very interesting. But I'm just thinking, Tom, if we, focus on the fashion itself, which was your original focus, then what happens? I mean, if we don't move to porn, where of course there is kind of a movement from Latin America, and even kind of a little distantly, but from the Indian diaspora, but. Although I think this person would probably be kind of like a fringe kind of example, really. But I'm not. But what about fashion itself?
Well, because I'm using photographic documentation, and it seems to come from certain places. Mainly, it's kind of focused on a particular kind of history, which is, like how a lot of the kind of histories of games kind of work, because, they entered into different places at different times and kind of different things happened and so on. So kind of getting into looking at the specificities of local history is really hard to get access to those kind of archives. So, I mean, in the work that I'm doing, I'm often, even to find the images that I have, using all kinds of techniques to like look at websites which are no longer showing images, for example. So, these kind of areas are even doubly hard to find. So I'm incredibly interested in any access that I can get to such kind of images and any memories or so on that people have of these things that are kind of from outside of what we might see as like the kind of core areas which produce a lot of information and data about games.
So that's actually for me it's an interesting methodological problem as well, because of again, these are areas in themselves that are not researched as much in game studies or cultural studies as much, as far as I know. And then there is information from or data from areas which don't have the archiving mechanisms that you're familiar with or are commonly available. So yeah, I mean,
an additional kind of, I guess, issue is maybe the kind of like fashion and gaming are both kind of really unequally distributed kind of industries in terms of like the global south and the north and so on, in the sense that often like these industries like rely on the kind of different ways of paying workers and the different kinds of financial kind of values of financial currencies and all this kind of stuff to even kind of produce these luxuries, if we can consider gaming and fashion as luxuries.
Thanks a lot, Tom. I don't know, over to Poonam again in case other people have questions. Otherwise,
no worries.
Not that. I think, we don't have any questions in the chat yet. But guys, if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and talk directly. It's okay. I was also thinking about, since we're talking about gender and fashion, and I was thinking about I was thinking about people who about cross dressing. I mean, I'm sure I'm not familiar with any, but I'm sure there are streamers who cross dress and stream themselves while playing. I'm thinking about that. I mean, and people who don't who identify as women, basically. I'm just thinking about that, their fashion, and what kind of choice, what kind of you know, what kind of fashion they might prefer, and stuff like
So
that.
I'm struggling to remember the exact terminology but there's people who, for example, exclusively cosplay characters of another gender from their own. And then there's also there's people who take the characters and imagine them as their gender.
Yeah.
Right. So you might have like a male Lara Croft, or a male. Trying to remember some of the characters from Overwatch, but I can't right now. But you also might have people who, as a woman, try to present themselves exactly as the kind of guy character, or vice versa.
Yeah, it definitely brings into question the whole idea of a woman, who constitutes as a woman, and what's the definition of a woman when we talk about gender. I was thinking about that. And Ruth is saying, in terms of drag streamers who game, Rebel is amazing. Could you tell us more, Ruth? Can you unmute yourself and tell us more about them?
I can tell you a little bit. I apologise, I've got cars going past the window. Rebel, former military, talks a lot about mental health and talks a lot about gaming, and also streams. I think they're doing like Final Fantasy 14 that they're streaming at the moment, sort of in prep for the next expansion. But yeah, they're just really inclusive, and they kind of mix up their streams a bit. Some of them are talking, some of them are purely gaming. But yeah, there's a very big community of that, but not so much people who game and cosplay at the same time, like all the time. Generally, if anyone cosplays, it's like for a one-off thing or something like that. But yeah, there's a big drag streaming community in gaming.
Interesting. I guess that's all the questions we have for today.
So I've just put in the link to our Facebook group and our WhatsApp group in case anyone wants to join. And we do have an announcement to make, which I think you're probably going to be the first people to hear this really outside our little group, which is, and Tom knows this, of course, because he was part of the, advisory group. DIGRA's Indian chapter is about to happen. So we are, I'm actually very glad that we could make this announcement at Tom's talk. And because he was also part of one of, as I said, he was advising us on many things. So we haven't gone official yet, but this is like, prelude really as an announcement. And we hope to go official very soon in the next week, actually. Yeah.
Yay! I wish we could all have a full round of applause. I mean,
or champagne, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, champagne. Yeah, that
Yes.
would have been lovely.
If this were other times, then probably we would have opened a bottle. But well, here we are. So thank you again, Tom, and thanks for all the wonderful questions and all of you for attending. And I think we shall turn off the recording right now, or
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.